Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in. Today I wanted to talk about some of the group of five teams that could be joining Power 5 leagues. It's kind of the trickle-down effect. If we do get big things happening in the ACC or maybe the Big 12 trying to expand, what is the result of those actions? Who are some of the group of five teams that are going to be wanted by the ACC to supplement the teams that they end up losing? And then we're also going to be talking about ESPN coming out and paying almost $8 billion to host the full college football playoff. A lot of people thought that Fox might be involved. You would have figured it would have happened. I'll give my reaction to that, but let's take a look. Group of five to Power 5 college football conference realignment, ranking group of five teams most likely to move on. This article just coming out a few days ago, and you can see his list right here with San Diego State at number 1, UNLV at number 2, Memphis at number 3, Boise State at number 4, South Florida and their new stadium at number 5, Colorado State, and then Fresno State. So certainly I would have UTSA probably, in this rankings list at number 5 or number 4. I would also possibly move Memphis up to number 2. San Diego State, I do think, is the crown jewel right now. When it comes to realignment and who is wanted, a lot of it comes down to TV market. A lot of it comes down to alumni, stadium situation, ratings. San Diego State checks a lot of those boxes. UNLV, their stadium situation is pretty bad. They play at Allegiant, but I mean, you could kind of view that as a good thing. An NFL stadium that's a world-class facility, although they're going to have virtually no environment in that world-class facility. You also do have the Las Vegas market that comes with it. Memphis is getting a big-time stadium renovation. They have a very solid program. I remember them going back to Paxton Lynch. It seems like they're always a good team out of the American. Boise State, they've got the program. They just don't have the TV market. The ratings are a bit low. Otherwise, Boise State, I think, already would be in a bigger conference than the Mountain West. They've had a phenomenal football program. So much success pretty much every year. Very consistent. South Florida, it's just because of their TV market and the fact that they're getting a new stadium. Colorado State listed on this list. Colorado State, I don't think is wanted too much. And then Fresno State down at number 7. And then I saw another rankings list. They were ranking the exact same thing, which group of 5 teams could join Power 5 leagues. How about UAB at number 5? I'm not sure I agree with UAB possibly being a top option. And then they do have UTSA at number 1. So UTSA, certainly San Antonio, that area. They do play at the Alamo Dome. But UTSA's had a lot of success recently. I could see them possibly being an option. Maybe for the Big 12, although if the Big 12 does expand, you would think what the Big 12 is waiting for is some cracks within the ACC. And when it comes to these teams joining leagues, like if I'm the ACC, I have to think about it practically. This is a very similar situation that the Big 10 was in. And remember what I said when the Big 10 was in that weird period where they had only 2 teams from the West Coast and everyone was saying it's not going to balance. I was preaching the West Wing. I said this makes no sense. They're going to have to add more teams from the West Coast, and that's exactly what they did. They added 2 more teams. So I could see the ACC, if they do lose Clemson, FSU, maybe it could be a few others, but I think the ACC is going to be able to remain pretty much intact. I say pretty much, lightly, because if you do lose both of those teams, your league becomes basically group of 5 anyways, but still, pretty much I think when you're talking about Wake Forest, Syracuse, Boston College, teams like that are not leaving, and they've already supplemented by adding 3 teams already, so they're going to have a stable group of like 8 to 10 teams. This is what I was talking about yesterday, that I think no way they leave. And then they're going to add, possibly depending on how many they lose, we would expect FSU and Clemson to be 2, but if they also lose a North Carolina, maybe an NC State, maybe a Miami, how do they supplement that? Where do they turn to? I think they turn to the West Coast possibly for 2 teams, and then also Memphis. So Memphis would kind of fit in the realm of an SMU type, where you're adding a team from the American, and then you want to go out west. You're looking at a team like San Diego State. That's your crown jewel number 1. We've heard the rumors of San Diego State possibly joining the Big 12. I think that's mainly a dilution thing. The Big 12 doesn't want to expand without bringing in teams that will actually add value. I'm not saying San Diego State won't add value, but it's not going to be nearly enough to really tip the scales, and it's not worth the risk for the Big 12. So San Diego State would fit in the ACC if the ACC loses teams because they already have Cal and Stanford on the West Coast, and their conference is very lopsided, and they need their own little mini West wing. We know the Big Ten's got the Big Four teams from the Pac-12 out there. They could add San Diego State. They could go after UNLV. They could look at Boise State. This list is saying Colorado State, Fresno State. I'm not sure if I buy those two, but if they do end up losing 3 or 4 teams, you could look at them rearming the conference with a Memphis and with 2 teams from the West Coast to create that West Wing, very likely being San Diego State, and then you start arguing UNLV, UNLV, Boise State, one of those 2 teams. Also, maybe South Florida gets into the mix, being in Florida. Possibly if they do lose Florida schools, let's say they lose both FSU and Miami, the ACC does, would they supplement that Florida loss with a team like South Florida, who is getting their new stadium and they're going to have a better situation soon? Or do they say, let's just go out west and also take Memphis? I think for sure if they lose 3 or 4 teams, Memphis will be joining the ACC. It just makes too much sense. And then I do think San Diego State would be the other one I'm for sure on. After that, it gets a little debatable. Who would want to join? Who would the ACC take to supplement the potential losses? And then you also have to look at the Big 12. Does the Big 12 decide to continue to go on the offense, possibly expand even more? Would they look at any of these teams? We've heard the rumors surrounding San Diego State. It doesn't seem likely. At this point, I think when it comes to Big 12 expansion, you don't want to expand just for the sake of expanding. So sure, if you can get a Miami, if you can get an FSU, absolutely do it. But are you going to take the scraps of the ACC? I mean, if the ACC fully implodes, I'm guessing they would be interested in some of those teams like a Virginia Tech, like a Virginia for the academics for sure. Would those teams be interested in the Big 12? I don't know. I'm not sure they would have much of a choice at that point if the conference fully implodes. It's kind of like what happened to the Pac-12. And you also do have Oregon State and Washington State still lingering there. I think Oregon State and Washington State are going to end up in the Mountain West, and that's going to be it. I don't see those programs, even though Oregon State has been better recently. So has Washington State, but Oregon State did get their stadium renovation. It looks great. They spent $200 million on it. The problem is Oregon State, if you look at them over time, they're not very attractive to the point where you would probably rather have San Diego State over Oregon State, and we've already seen the Big 12 be very coy about adding San Diego State. So I think the Big 12 right now is looking at the ACC. If things go very badly there and a lot of teams leave, they would certainly be looking for any, on-ramp so they don't get left out in the cold, just like Oregon State and Washington State. And those programs and those teams we're talking about that could potentially go to the Big 12. You're looking at a team like Syracuse. You join a great basketball league in the Big 12. Syracuse, we know they are a very solid basketball team. Virginia Tech, Lane Stadium, the great atmosphere there. I know Virginia Tech hasn't been great recently, but they're another team. So this is all important stuff to take into account. But what I'm saying is, look for the ACC, if they lose 2 or more teams, to head west and really at least add 1 team to mitigate the travel issues that they would have when it comes to group of 5 teams. And you're looking at San Diego State. I know we've said it for a long time, but they're still a top team that could be joining a Power 5 league. But this is all kind of anecdotal, because if the ACC does lose their 2 big dogs, are you really joining a Power 5 league? Because the ACC at this point is already so watered down, at least when it comes to football, and really also basketball. And you're talking about the Duke, North Carolina thing. Does the ACC, this was an article that I saw, cling to the Duke, North Carolina rivalry and just say, whatever, we're going to lose all these teams. Let's keep Duke, North Carolina no matter what, so we at least have some relevancy. That could be a thing that they do, and maybe they're able to keep both Duke and North Carolina. But really for the ACC, they're powerless if all these teams do want to leave because of how bad their TV deal is. But either way, we're going to move on to this next topic. $7.8 billion media rights expansion for college football playoff as broadcasting giant ESPN agrees for a 6-year deal, according to reports. Wow. So ESPN comes out and says, listen, we hosted all the playoff games. It was not a split between us and Fox. I mean, we know how the Super Bowl does it, where they rotate it in between NBC, Fox, and CBS. That is not what happened with the college football playoff. It was not like Fox hosted one game and then ESPN hosted the other. ESPN hosted everything, and now apparently they're going to host everything again. And I'm surprised by this. I really thought when you're talking about more games, significantly more games, at least the first round matchups, Fox would be in on getting some of the first round games. And I do think it would have been a better viewing experience if Fox would have gotten some of these games, just because you do want to spread it around the networks. You don't want the same thing, the same presentation every single playoff game. So yeah, this did surprise me. I will say, we know how bad Fox is with commercials. How terrible would it be during the playoff on how bad Fox... Well, actually, maybe Fox would have to actually stick to certain things. I mean, if you just watch a big noon broadcast compared to ESPN, the amount of commercials that are in Fox's broadcasts are just ridiculous. And big noon... I mean, listen, I'm glad what's going on with the Big Ten and how they're changing it. Well, I guess they're not changing it, but they are adding in, you've got CBS every week at 3:30, and you've got NBC at 7:30. You would think those spots would be the big games. The Ohio State-Penn State game would be 7:30. The Oregon-Ohio State game, well, it's going to be at least 7:30, or at least 3:30. I would expect that Oregon-Ohio State game, because of the West Coast time zone, for sure to be 7:30. It'd be a 4:30 Pacific start. That honestly might be the biggest game of the year, Ohio State at Oregon, but that's just kind of the thing with Fox. And then you guys remember the sham thing they started doing where they would put Deion Sanders on at 10 a.m. Mountain Time because they were obsessed with views? I mean, that's just ridiculous. You can't start games at 10 a.m. That's ridiculous. You're too money hungry at that point, and that's really why I got off of Fox. Even though Fox technically does have a better picture than ESPN, they're just obsessed with commercials. I am surprised, though. I'm surprised Fox didn't get any games when it comes to this. And you got all the people, of course, saying, well, $7.8 billion, all the schools are getting all of that. Why not just pay the players? Yeah, that's coming. The players are about to become, I wouldn't say about, but soon in the next 4 or 5 years, they will become employees, and the school will have to pay the players, and it's going to be a lot more easier to understand. But I do think you're still going to have the bonus of the NIL deals and paying kids more money, and that's always going to exist. If teams can find an advantage in terms of a recruitment, in terms of a transfer portal superstar, they're going to find that advantage and utilize it. What college football would need is an actual governance to where they start punishing this stuff hardcore. And maybe they should come out with a statement and say, all right, listen, we know everyone's been cheating, but from here on out, we're actually going to start punishing this stuff, and we're just going to bull ban you. Like, you got to do something to where, because people just don't take the NCAA seriously, and why should they? And you hear these reports about, Tennessee being investigated for NIL stuff. It's just impossible to take seriously because literally every team is cheating. Every team is doing the exact same thing. So why just punish Tennessee? But either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.